He might not. Let me. He just DM'd me. Let me. He might not know it's at 1. Let me.
I thought he was in on that. I thought we got the thumbs up from him on that, but
Did we? He might have just forgot.
I just shared the link there. I'll check it out.
I've got one lone fly. It's 20 degrees outside, and there's a fly that's still alive, and he's in my kitchen.
they've migrated north from my house.
What's wrong?
Well, while we're seeing if we can get Keith on, I'll just go ahead and say hello to all the replays watching this on YouTube in a future that I'm sure is a lot more bright than whatever is happening right now. And this is the town hall for JournoDAO for November 16th, 2022. And if you're new, check us out at JournoDAO.xyz. But really the way to get up on what's going on is to reach out, come to one of these town halls, get access to our Discord. There's a dialogue there where you can go through that. I believe that Spencer's set up last I checked. So that's where to get more info, and of course just keep watching and hope you're enjoying the future. Welcome Keith, welcome Nick, John, Glenn, Crystal, everyone. I think we all know each other here, so we'll forego, or we at least have met, so we'll forego introductions. I think I was playing around with just kind of switching up the format here just slightly for these town halls. Let me just pull up a sort of hack together agenda, and we can.
But Eric is not what I'm used to. Hold me, I'm scared.
Sorry, Keith. Do you need if you need some sort of like indie music in the background to comfort you, we can
always
get that going. So just I mean just first some quick DAO updates from the last week. I think it's been a little bit of a quiet week, kind of winding down towards the holidays. But this morning, Crystal, Keith, Spencer, and I joined John and Humpty Calderon to record the final of 4 episodes of a 4-episode special for Crypto Sapiens, and a little collaboration we've been working with there. John, if you're available to speak, if you want to, can you give us a little update on that project?
Yeah, it's coming up after the decentralized episode mini-series is over, and we just published episode 2 of the decentralized 4-part mini-series today. So that's running a little bit behind, but the next 2 weeks we'll be publishing episodes 3 and 4, and then the week after that we're publishing the DiGiorno series episode 1. Actually, we may, and we talked about it today just a few minutes ago, try to get DiGiorno out next week, and then just publish all of them together. But I was kind of thinking that decentralized, for me anyway, it's what gave me the idea. It set the stage to be able to start thinking about decentralized journalism. So I don't know. Yeah, that one's kind of up in the air as to whether to do it at the same time or wait. So because I got the whole idea, the concept of doing the mini series over journalism from the science one. And Keith and Spencer were actually on the decentralized mini series as speakers, and they did a great job. So, and you appeared on there too, Eric, at some point. At the very end of one of them.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was audio only, so this would be the first time these miniseries are in video, which is a plus, I think. So because it'll be able to reach a lot of the YouTube audience.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to it, and also to how it might help us deepen a relationship with the whole Crypto Sapiens universe there.
Yeah, I think Humpty being there and participating today really lit a fire under him, and he definitely is on board for sure.
And as our ringer in the Web3 podcast world, you and Crystal also collaborated on another podcast, right? Maybe
Yeah,
Crystal, you want to talk about that one?
Bankless DAO Legal Guild. Eureka John connected me with Comeback Kid, is Michael. And we did a conversation about censorship and Web3, and that just dropped this week. It's in the newsletter. And
Yeah,
Eureka
Mike
John-
Rabinovich.
Yes.
Yeah, he's with the Bankless DAO Legal Guild.
Yeah.
So that's what was it's the umbrella that the Ab Initio podcast is under.
And I was able to send it to my lawyer family, and they were like, "Oh, it's legit." So it was great. My sister thought it was very ironic too.
This is it here,
Yes.
right? Are we all able to see this?
Yeah.
Right, cool. And also, I think Spencer made an appearance over the last week somewhere, right?
Oh yeah, DAO Lens did their Humans of DAO podcast. It was recorded, but I don't think the editing's done yet, so they'll let us know when that's completed. But yeah, that was a good one. It's a good moderator.
What was the topic there?
In our case, it was mainly basic stuff about how this technology can affect journalism and kind of change around the business dynamics and the, like reaching a niche audience of supporters. I brought in the concepts we had about the Substack trend already moving in this direction, and Web3 is in certain respects a natural extension of that. And I talked about the protocol and platform distinction that we talked about in one of the JournoDAO episodes. So it was a good talk. So that should turn out to be a good podcast.
I think what's really cool is watching us go into these communities that aren't journalism communities and spreading these narratives and dropping them into the collective discourse. That to me is fascinating. So yeah, keep doing this stuff for sure.
Any other appearances in Hollywood or elsewhere that I'm leaving out?
I don't think so. When I put the newsletter together, I didn't see any more over there.
All right, cool. So yeah, plenty out there and plenty in the works. It's pretty exciting to see. So one other little section here at the top, especially for the replay folks, and that's just some ways to get involved. One is we received our grant from Ocean Protocol to do a little research on setting up a marketplace for journalists on Ocean. And kind of the first few steps of that involve a little bit of research, putting together a questionnaire and surveying some folks in journalism and Web3. And Crystal, you spent some time this week getting us all set up with a system to do some bounties, to offer up some bounties for folks to help us with that. I'm going to give you, see if I can give you screen sharing capability here, if you're able to walk us through that, if you can.
Sure. I just figured out how to share my screen in Zoom. It's only been like 3 years been using this shit. All right. So I went ahead and set us up on Wonderverse. I'd heard some things and I'd used it with Unlock for a grant thing and really liked it. Similar to DWork, but it just seemed more intuitive. So I went ahead and set us up. There's a link in the server. And if you don't find it, just ping me and I'll send it again. So anybody can join. And then basically, it's kind of like project management plus bounties. So these are the tasks that I also created a Notion as well. So I started with Notion, kind of organized everything there, set this up. This imported the tasks from a database in Notion. And then for the bounties, basically, I was just playing. These probably will get removed. But this is where you set the bounties up. And then you put the details in there and then you assign somebody to review it. And then once you assign the task, it is linked to our, let me see, hold on. The Zoom controls are in front of my browser. How do I move them? Oh God, technology. Okay. So then it is connected to the channel down here that I added. So once a bounty is claimed or applied for, it comes into this channel. And then the ongoing project management goes into the incubator task channel, and that's just will allow us to have conversations about the bounties as they're being, executed. And then, oh man, I need a big monitor. Let's see.
There's some way to shift it around, but I forget.
I forget too. I have a big monitor in the closet. I might just have to hook it up. Okay, so then, so there's little pods. So as we grow, we can make these little pods. So like I made an Ocean Grant Protocol pod. So each project can have its own pod. That way we have this like space to come, keep all the bounties organized, go back and forth. And then proposals. This is how I used it at Unlock. I created a proposal to apply for their grant committee, and they had already put the template in place. So all I had to do was click the button, use the template, submit it. So this is something we can also use like when we're bringing journalists in and they want to apply to be part of a working group or something. And this is all the back end stuff. You can also connect your wallets to it. You can connect a Gnosis safe and an individual wallet so that we can begin to have the bounties flow through. Once a bounty is accepted, the work is done, and then it's approved, then you can submit the bounty just like you would on DWork too. Yeah, so that's the gist of it. And then over on Notion, here's just like a very basic, and if this works, then we'll use this kind of as a template for grants moving forward. So here's the objectives, where the original grant was from, so we can find all the information about what needs to be done. Team details, budget, and then here's the tasks. So before I made the Wonderverse, or before I synced them up, I put the tasks over here, and then we can move them through these boards. But then the Wonderverse is connected to these tasks, so they sync up. I don't know if that will actually be productive or not, but we'll see as we go through it. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
That's what I did instead of homework this week.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I was like, I need to write a term paper. I'm like, okay, let's go do grant stuff. So tomorrow night, I will be drinking a lot of coffee and writing a term paper.
This DAO runs on procrastination.
It's awesome because in Crypto Sapiens, we've integrated DWork with Discord as well, and we're operating off a very similar system. So
they're very
got
similar.
me is already trained.
Yeah. I mean, it really did function almost the same way. I just found it a little more intuitive from the admin perspective, but it could just be because I hadn't done a whole lot in DWork, but I have done bounties there. So
also the DWork user interface is kind of overwhelming, complex. There's so much more stuff going on than on Wonder.
Yeah, and I really liked the way, like if you go to the main page, so I'm also connected for WAGMI because they also use it. That's how I found it. So I can hop into theirs, and I'm sure DWork does this too, but then you go to the main page and you can see all the open bounties from all of them. So I just scrolled through one day when I was bored, like, oh, it's open. Just kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also a good way people can find out about JournoDAO. It's an interesting kind of marketing avenue.
Yeah, I went ahead and put in our
Bounty hunters.
website. Yeah, I put in our website and all that. And I'm glad we have the gates set up in front of the community too, because those bounty hunters do wander in when they see bounties and it gets like ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we have DAO Lens set up.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to set all that up. It's awesome.
Bounty hunters aren't as cool as I was led to believe through science fiction.
Just terminally online.
Yeah. Spamming you.
So, speaking of grants, another thing that Crystal and I have been keeping an eye out for the last week or so is, basically more grants. Because I've tried to sit down the last couple of weeks. It's been a bit hectic, and to try to we talked about a decentralized reporting project and what that could look like. And I'm kind of stuck on the best way to work to think through the incentives of that and structures. And so then I've kind of in the last week started to think like, well, this could actually be good fodder for another research grant. And so I've spent quite a bit of time over the weekend just kind of researching what's out there. And there's Crystal and I have both been looking at, there's some, interesting small grant like research opportunities from like the Ethereum Foundation, and CELO has they just launched a new kind of grant making entity that they spun off, and been having some conversations in the founders roundtable about possible funding avenues as well. So that's kind of how I've been thinking about moving that forward. So, if anyone is interested in thinking through some of these grant proposals or helping to do some research on those, there's actually still quite a bit out there. I've been surprised what's still out there given the market circumstances. And even just today there was a new opportunity from Ceramic that actually, it's in the Discord, and I think you're going to want to take a look at it, Keith. Maybe potentially some funding for continuing work on the Journo token, because this one in particular is geared more towards developers. So yeah, I don't know if you had a chance to have a look at that, but
not yet, but I'll check it out later.
Yeah, and Keith, I pinged you in the DM chat I created a Notion page for what Eric just described with a couple links that I'd already found to kind of narrow the search. So let me know. And if you guys find stuff, just ping me and I'll nerd out and put it in Notion. And then we have an ongoing database and things we're looking at.
Cool. That's awesome.
One quick thought there in terms of like where else to find grants is that, especially as you start thinking about what a stack looks like for managing JournoDAO and like who are the participating, whether it's IPFS or Arweave or the Graph or others, Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, like these are, I think, really good places to go for especially if there's some way to tie it to what it is they're doing and support of kind of the organization. And so that might be another way to think about where it might not be grants that are out there publicly necessarily, but going to them and saying, hey, we're doing this thing and we're doing it on Polygon and we're doing it on Arweave and we're using the Graph for indexing is definitely like a good way to get into a bunch of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm helping WAGMI with that very thing. So we're putting grants together through their connections to these protocols. So we're doing that as well. So it's interesting to see that approach in action too. It's much more one-to-one networking, but it's also very powerful once you get into it. So definitely.
I think once the Journo token's a little bit more polished, we can kind of have that discussion about where it should live and could there be like grant funding if we choose like one ecosystem over another.
One other last on this is I've started this other organization with a bunch of folks in kernel called Folk, FOLK.GG, which is largely thinking about folk ways, alternatives in terms of how we think about intellectual property and whether we need to own all of these ideas in this way, and start thinking about how to define the commons outside of Andreessen Horowitz being the ones that are defining what some of those licenses look like. And so we're starting up a Creative Commons working group, hopefully around NFTs that Lessig is on board with. There's a bunch of other, LexDAO is involved and a bunch of others are involved. So part of where I think this might get interesting is also looking at grants from nouns and just what they've done with CC0 and thinking more broadly about IP in this space. And so we have a bunch of sub projects that we're largely thinking about this as a public good and organizing a bunch of projects within this. And I could imagine there being a way that decentralized reporting fits within that, and thinking about some of the ways to orient that more towards what it might look like in terms of ownership of that media in various ways. Then it could be something that's contorted into a way that nouns can support, or others that are Creative Commons kind of related entities that are looking for supporting that kind of thinking. That could be another like fun way for us to play together on some of those things. So happy to talk about it.
Yeah, that'd be great. How I mean, I would love it if somebody from JournoDAO could get in on that meeting, or I don't know, that group. It'd be interesting.
And we have that fundraising platform already built out that we used for the block tower conversation. So that also is another supporting document to keep in
Yeah.
mind for these conversations.
I just clicked through to the one of the GitHub, it looks like, for folk, and I love that Jonathan Mann is mentioned like in the first comment. So that that seems like a good sign to me.
Yeah, we're playing with using this thing from kernel called signature economies that we're using as like a there's a whole bunch of music related folks that are involved, and we're looking at that as part of the starting point, but then it's also part of what we're doing with this entry point is also overlapping with Pluriverse, that WTF, which is a Walkies thing. And so like there's a whole bunch of overlapping things we'll probably use similar tooling for, and to how to start feeding this broader organization. So there might be other ways to plug in together and figure out how to also leverage that tooling in whatever way for a manifesto here, whatever might be interesting. But yeah, happy to share more on that at some point.
Yeah, I've been super interested in the signature economies for a while. I'm just not GitHub literate enough to make sense of the resources that I found, but like the idea that I was interested in it from was like a petitioning idea. So I'd love to talk about that privately, or I guess off.
Oh, totally. And part of what we're doing is forking that and making available, and then bringing it back into kernel. And Andy is very on board with all of this, and I know that's going to be part of the next wave of kernel stuff. And there's a huge benefit here legally to this really feeling like signatures in terms of doing some code deference stuff. And so one of the folks I'm doing this guy Kyle Smith, who's one of the core folks at
Best Ape, yeah.
And yeah, Best Ape. Yeah, he's fucking amazing. Anyway, so he's one of the folks that's really spearheading that, and we're playing with exactly how to make that available to others and make it really workable. And so yeah, you should come and play with the folk stuff for sure, because that's going to be a big part of what we do.
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Derail. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then I'm just scrolling through this. Is fascinating. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, one other thing I did throw down under other ways to get involved is, I think we can always use more help with community management and communications. Although Crystal is kind of the whiz at all things, but it'd be great to. I'm sure she would probably appreciate if we had more bandwidth to go around with that. I was just trying to think of like, what are some of the ways that the folks could get involved at this point in the development of the DAO, and that was the first one that sprung to mind.
Yeah, some brainstorming on strategy for that would be great. Like I'm tapped out on strategy to bring people in for sure. I'm getting ready to put together this boot camp for WAGMI to train community managers across the ecosystem. So that's going to be a big thing. So we can deploy some of that in our community for sure. But definitely if anybody wants to help bring people in and help manage when they get in there, that'd be great.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a weird one because I mean, we've like consciously like not thrown open the doors to just like let everyone in and encourage like, number go up in the Discord as well. Yeah, I don't know. So I mean, so far, like I think the kind of curated conversation we have going on has been good. But yeah, it's always good to have some more bandwidth and more hands around for sure.
Yeah, and the more bandwidth we have, the more we can be mindfully unravel parts of the onboarding. Like I like the fact that sorry, my dog's doing weird things in the background. I like the fact that it's gated right now and it's slow growth. So I want to be mindful that as we expand in bandwidth, we also expand and letting people in, but that it doesn't turn into a Discord shit show.
Right. Cool. Just so like a few other things that I've just had on my mind, I just wanted to throw out there just to see if anyone has any thoughts. And if you don't, that's fine too. We can just move into going off on FTX forever. But just some things that have kind of been on the back burner. Actually, this is a new thing that came up was CoinDesk. Somebody that I had a call with CoinDesk a few weeks back, and one of their product people there put together a Web3 kind of like an introduction to crypto investing, actually, just like the basics. And it's the medium they're using is newsletters. So it's basically you pay a certain amount for this class, and they send you a newsletter a week with investing tips, basically, and kind of the crypto basics, which seemed like a potentially interesting model for us, particularly when we reach the point where we have more of a mailing list of journalists who are interested in learning more. We kind of had at ONA, like in that workshop in particular, like I felt like we actually had the captive audience for that right there, because there were several people asking questions about like really basic stuff about Web3, and there was a really interesting onboarding opportunity right there in person at ONA. And so it would have been nice if we had this ready-made product, like, oh well, if to continue the conversation, you can go ahead and sign up for our Web3, our newsletter course on intro to Web3. So I don't know, I think it's just kind of something to keep in mind, and an idea to kind of keep on the back burner.
That makes me think about, I forget I did this occasionally, but I think I suggested doing like a regular webinar of like,
oh yeah.
that people can like sign up for. And I think that would be a good like just signpost for people to be like, you can like RSVP, and then it's like this formal thing, and it's not like a town hall, which is more like maybe an intimidating or something, but like a specific place for people to just come and ask what they feel like is, or maybe dumb questions about Web3 or whatever.
Would this be making it sound like a general sort of webinar, but could this also be special purpose ones like those workshop recordings we did a while ago?
Well, yeah, I think we could use like a general like intro one to just gauge interest, and then depending on who shows up and how many people, we could be like, would there be interest here to go deeper on any of these subjects, and just do a little bit of like research there. But I just have a feeling that like if we do like a once a month webinar that's like crypto for journalists or like Web3 for journalists, that we get a lot of people potentially, and it would give us something to like just send around, like, if you want to know more, just sign up for one of these like webinars.
Could this perhaps coincide with the JournoDAO podcast idea? Could these be recorded as podcasts, or are these is that different?
I would think it'd be different because it could be both, but it could also be more educationally oriented, whereas ours podcasts are more conversational. I think it's both. I think it's a yes and.
The difference with a podcast is like you're basically submitting yourself to be recorded, for posterity. So like, if the idea is it's a webinar where you can come and show up and ask dumb questions, but it's also being recorded as a podcast, it's a different dynamic.
Yeah, and we can use token gating for that too, and we can use unlock, and it might also be a good excuse to explore that live peer grant, Keith, that you and I were talking about, from live streaming and recording for webinar. That might be a good excuse to write that grant too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think depending on I think the option's always open depending on like what happens in the webinar. If it's like useful, most webinars I go to, like, I know are being recorded, like, because you have to record them so that people who weren't there can watch it or whatever. And if we have a podcast feed, depending on what that other content is, potentially that could just be like another thing that we put on the feed. People can listen to it, they cannot listen to it, and it doesn't just kind of try and put all of our content wherever it starts to get traction.
I'm kind of curious, has anybody here attended any of the ACJR webinars that they do every month?
No, what is it again?
ACJR, I know
Oh,
Eric's in there. You're in there too, Keith. Yeah, on Telegram. They do like these calls monthly or bi-monthly. And I've always found them kind of totally useless, but all these serious people show up and talk about journalism, kind of pat each other on the back. So if you did something more instructional, I think based on the other day I posted a comment in there about please ask me questions about blockchain analytics, for the love of God, please. And I got all these responses. One of the people that wanted to talk to me is one of the people that runs that group. So I think they have interest in doing that.
Okay, cool. How do they like frame it? Like, what's the purpose of it? Like,
they don't know. Well, the webinar they frame it as like a semi-private get-together with a couple of big journalists who are breaking certain stories. Like I think Laura Shen's been on there, Danny Nelson's been on there. A couple of bigger people.
Are you still doing the GCR talks?
I am. I also started doing talks at Metrics DAO, which is like a community of analysts, and they don't know any more than the people at GCR or JournoDAO or anywhere else. Like no one knows how to do blockchain analytics well. And that's my conclusion.
Right.
Oh, and Bellingcat. That's another. Yeah, sorry.
So we'll need to have Nick do a workshop on blockchain analytics then.
I think
that could be a
it's pretty
premium tier.
interesting,
Yeah.
It's
I'll do as many as you want.
We restricted to the founders lounge.
yeah, I'm wondering what you
That's
think about-
actually. What's that?
Sorry,
I guess that. Go ahead. No, go ahead, because I was going to move on. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think that like webinar as a starting product and thinking about what are those topics specifically. So like blockchain analytics is one, another can be decentralized reporting and how to use these tools. And maybe there's a few other kind of focus things. And as you think about like, what are the communities that you can target those to? And so whether it's things like journalism schools or, publications, and, David Grant, for instance, who's just leaving Facebook's journalism piece. And so I know him through kernel stuff, and I'm going to chat with him on a bunch of other stuff after Thanksgiving. And I think that like, he probably has a ton of connection. Like he's going into this consulting thing, and I'm wondering whether this is something I could imagine even bringing up with him. So that could be interesting. And then the other piece is just like, how do communities themselves, especially that have different focuses, there's different DAOs that have lots of different things that they're focused on. How do they think about using these same tools for reporting or supporting reporting on the things that that they want to do? And so I've even, I think folks like Moonbirds, for instance, have research reports that are focused on the NFT market and art market for its community, but thinking about what are the ways to create tools for communities to then report on or help them get folks to report on things that they care about is also interesting. So I think that like narrowing it down to webinar and saying, hey, what is the way that we can have some educational piece that then brings people in from these types of target communities you can think about marketing to, and these types of topics that might jive. Like that feels like a really nice place to kind of carve off and see what works and kind of experiment. So I think it's a really, really cool idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good points.
Yeah, we met David at ONA in September, and I've been emailing with him about trying to set up. I actually invited him to this town hall, but I think he's on a plane right now. Because I think that would be a cool connection to make since he's leaving Meta. I didn't know about the consulting part. I knew that he's worked with a ton of local journalists over recent years, so I think it'd be good to at least have a chat there. But yeah, like the webinar thing is interesting, and I was going to tie that into if we could get a solid offering going there, along with maybe some other things, then we could build that into some actual benefits for the founder NFT, and maybe revisit that, and maybe do another round of trying to amplify that, and also maybe revisit, like a lower, less expensive tier for that as well. Make things to think about for after the holidays, I suppose.
I mean, it could be something where the founders, NFT holders are allowed to make suggestions for webinar topics or podcast topics, something like that, if they think a certain area needs more coverage or something like that. Maybe.
That's good, yeah. And then one other thing that I just wanted to mention, because I've kind of already been working on this and have been kind of slowly drafting this over the months, is I started writing basically some blog posts about kind of the larger vision, long-term goals for JournoDAO that we talked about in these conversations, that we've talked about at ONA and in Argentina. That kind of long-term vision doesn't really actually exist in the written word form anywhere. It's in a couple of drafts on my computer, but for whatever reason, it has not coalesced into something that I feel is publishable. And I actually kind of started breaking it down to just a series of problem and solution statements in terms of problems in journalism as we see it and as we discuss it, and then matching those to potential solutions in Web3. So I guess maybe what I could do is start to share some of those in Discord and elsewhere, and maybe at a upcoming town hall or even a podcast, and we could kind of start to flesh those out and build them up a little bit, and then those can also flow into grant applications as well.
Maybe put them in Notion too, so we can
Okay.
collab and write, and then also sync it up with Discord so it's public facing as well.
Okay, yeah. It is like there is like a brain block where like I sometimes don't know what is the correct platform for this piece of content or this thing that is in my brain, and everything just kind of ends up landing in my Google Drive, which is obviously the exact wrong place that we want to be using.
Notion's become my brain dump spot. I've got like 5 different Notions. I've got 2 that are mine, and then I've got like 4 or 5 that are other communities. And it really, once you get in that mindset, it's like, oh, let me put it in Notion, let me shoot the link, and then everybody can come in and then all you have to do too is if you have one page you want the public to see, but then you don't want the public to see the rest of it, you can just section that off, put a public link out, and then that public link, you can open it up to comments and editing and whatnot. And then that way it becomes collaborative pretty easy. So it gets out of your brain.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Make a note to do that.
Crystal, why don't you take Eric's hand,
Yeah.
your machete, and lead him through the Notion jungle so that he can find the way back.
Now
can-
I'm scared, Keith.
We can do that and gather one night, and we'll just play poker and also
There you go.
hand walk Eric through the Notion jungle. And then you can jump on the go-karts if you gotta let some stress out.
They should
Yeah.
let our gather avatars access Notion on their own little computers at their cubicles.
Nice. Although I think John's got a fax machine, so that could be difficult.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything for ideas section, anything to share before I give over the balance of our time to the immortal Sam Bankman-Fried?
One other set of things that might be interesting to you guys, which is there's a few different groups of folks I'm starting to work with, and I don't even know how to describe this exactly, but it's kind of a open source attention protocol folks that are looking at how to think about mark making across different platforms and how different communities then make meaning from those marks. And so I'm working a bunch with this one group that they were called the Common Sense Makers before. They started around these ideas of stigmergy, which are really interesting. This is like which is ants, right? Like how ants learning from how ants leave pheromone markers in their environment as markers for other ants that are making their own autonomous decisions, and like how you can kind of think about what are the ways that humans make sigmometric markers in digital spaces. And so really, really smart folks that are building that piece. And then we're thinking about how to integrate various ways with them. And then there's another group called relational.fyi, and they're building this thing called rlog.xyz. And they're also, like, I think very much of a like mind of like how to do group journaling is kind of the way that they're thinking about it. But so I really, they're lovely, like amazing people too. And so that's going on. And there's this index.as folks that I'm going to talk to tomorrow that I don't know exactly what it is, but it's kind of curating communities, curating into indices that I've been thinking about how to do in various ways. So there's a bunch of different tooling that's coming about on the tech side that we're thinking about how to do in decentralized ways, and allow, you know, in my view on this is like how do we allow communities in agreement to manage for themselves what marks are made across whatever platforms they might be, and how do you make this work so that the communities can manage their own tools effectively and their own tech. And so, you know, a bunch of these things might end up being also interesting for how, you know, as you guys think about the stack here, and like whether it's Unlock and Wonderverse and LivePeer and some of these other pieces, but like what are the ways to curate information within the Discord or within Twitter or some of these other places? Like, how do we start allowing those tools to actually reflect how this community wants to organize that information for itself? I think that's also the tools that will start being available for other types of decentralized reporting, as you think about like what are the ways that communities start curating their own stories from their own, you know, whether it's Discords or Slacks or whatever it might be, like what are the ways that these things get surfaced and kind of brought to the attention of the broader community, and then how do those things get broadcast out to other communities? And so I've got a bunch of these threads going with a bunch of different folks, and I think this gets interesting as you have some more specific use cases. And so like one, for instance, I talked to Naran at Penvala, for instance, and like Penvala has like 90-ish like member organizations that are part of the same community that is kind of supporting each other, that are all very bidlery kind of open source kind of public good focused folks for the most part, like Kernel and Platform DAO and a bunch of these others. And yet there's no way they really communicate with each other. And so like the idea of something like a Panvala magazine, that like, how do these communities tell stories to one another in some way that then gets published, I think is really interesting, right? And like, it's something that would certainly strengthen Panvala as an organization, as well as like allow a lot of these communities to help each other in ways that I think they're pretty well aligned. And so there might just be more emergent tools that we're starting to experiment with, and it might, you know, I'd love to bring some of that stuff as it happens. And like, we have a group in Kernel that's starting to explore different Web3 social tools, as I think this is, especially with Twitter being fucking dumpster fire, and like, you know, the Guardian is doing, you know, Mastodon how-tos, which is like fucking amazing, but like also it's, I don't think it's gonna work out. And so I think as we're doing this, we're starting to like, oh, can we start exploring all these peer-to-peer and decentralized social and commerces? I think this is going to be a big part of the next wave of adoption, especially as we get through more of the need for these crypto wallets in all cases. I think especially with some of the stuff that the protocol is doing, will unlock a lot of that as a friction point in the next, you know, January, February. And so I think a bunch of these pieces are coming together to start making these tools more pliable for communities to manage kind of their own curation and creation of this stuff. And so I'll keep highlighting that as I go, but I think it's worth like that from the other side of what does the citizen journalism of these communities look like, and what is the way they're tooling. I think there's a bunch of stuff that's kind of emergent there that might be also useful for JournoDAO to use, or think about how to apply to other cases outside of JournoDAO. So anyways, that's just a wide flag of there's people doing lots of cool shit, and like they definitely want to build together. And I think getting you guys involved in some of those conversations as we get them together and have a place to work together on this stuff. And that's one of the things I want to build, is just like, how do we have a space where we can all collaborate, and it's not in each other's discords. It's much more of this like more fluid way of doing it. So as I do that, I'd love to show you guys what those folks are doing, and see if there's ways that you can think about applying it to, you know, other professional contexts of how might you organize these types of patterns in ways that have been well proven across time and space. So, anyways, that's what.
Do you have a link for the first one you mentioned, common sense makers, or was that?
Oh yeah, so that's yeah. I don't know if they have public stuff, but I think they've got a thing called Stig People. Oh, here's
Keith, this kind of dovetails into what we were putting in the Discord last night about a collaborative mastodon between multiple DAOs, so that we have a place to coordinate and connect and have these collective conversations. That's not, for everyone.
Yeah, and my hope for some of that, honestly, is and this is part of our thinking is with meme, is like, especially even as like Twitter, there's like a bunch of people sharing like journalist lists of all their Mastodon handles in their various places, for instance. And as we do that, one thing I'd love to be able to help people to do is like allow communities to manage those connections to each other outside of what platform they're going into. So you can start effectively even just using their Twitter handles, and as you do that, you're effectively, all of those folks are becoming, they agree to some, they have an agreement that they're all signatories on, that they then have tokens connected to that thing. And maybe we won't even need Web3 auth for some of this stuff eventually, but what that starts allowing you to do is that community manages then how they move. So if they want to then plug that into that community now on Mastodon, or how they, together control a Twitter account, or whatever those things that they might do, like you in some ways, even if it stays on Twitter or stays elsewhere, you're at least those edges and those relations are now being owned. Like that contract is managed by that community, rather than, oh, we have to go to this next platform and it lives in this Google sheet or whatever. So I think we're starting to pull a bunch of these tools together and migrating APIs to enable this whole thing to work a little bit more cleanly. Hopefully Twitter is still alive at that point, because it is definitely has some troubles. But I think that's one of the ways that there's a big opportunity, especially with journalists, I think, which I've seen has been leading the way, as well as academics have started to be kind of the front line of experimenting with decentralized social. And so that could be a real opportunity to like onboard folks.
Rewinding all the way back to the beginning with a dumb question. You said mark making, and like I'm not familiar with that phrase. Do you literally mean just like idiomatically like making your mark on a space?
Yeah, so there's a whole so this touches a bunch of like knowledge management and collective intelligence communities, which they don't even call it that anymore. And there's a bunch of sub genres of folks, and all of these folks are in kernel too, thinking about open data and Web3 and what are the ways you start designing these systems. But a lot of the sense making and like with stigmergy stuff, like what are the marks you make in any form, like as you're signing things on chain, obviously, but like, and that's kind of Andy's stuff with signature economies, is like, how do we think about this not as read, write, own, but it's more of this intention of signing. And I think a lot about agreements as this core thing for Web3. And so some of this is then these marks are things like upvoting within a community that something gets curated into a publication, or flagging something for moderation, or whatever those marks are that you make. How do you make those understandable within that community across different platforms effectively? And so you start freeing yourselves of that data, those graphs being the affordances of your tools being managed by the tools themselves, and then kind of constructing how you can be. And instead, communities start deciding, what are the marks we want to make? What do these votes mean for us in what ways? And then how do we apply those in the different spaces we want to be, and have those affordances meet what we want them to do effectively? And so that's kind of the, we're not users of these tools, that they're our tools, right? And we decide how we want to work together, how we relate to each other, when we comment on something, when we upvote on something, when we flag something. How do we want that to then proceed in terms of how we manage our own content or publications or whatever it might be? So that's kind of the high level. And so some of that is marks is just this, it could be like likes could be a mark that we're all making, and we can think implicitly what that might mean across a bunch of different platforms. But I think some of this is, how do you drive to more local solutions that don't, it's not like golden.xyz, for instance, is one version of like, oh, how do we manage what is true for this community? But I think that starts going down the same path that like a lot of the semantic web stuff did, where it's like, oh, we're trying to define for this global, uniform monolithic community, what is true, where it's actually like communities for themselves have their own social facts and can agree on, even Wikipedia is like, what is notable to Wikipedians might be very different than what it is for a different group. And so it's how do we start thinking about those in the most abstracted form, and then thinking about how to build these protocols up so that you can start plugging in across all these different existing Web 2 and Web 3 platforms. So yeah, it's a little bit of a term up, but I'm not even like deep in the collective intelligence thing. So I'm probably like sense making folks is kind of another definition here, is like those who use sense making in their terminologies, what they're trying to do as a community, will sometimes use that term.
Yeah, Sapien was big on that term and thinking that way, sense making, and that's like their community calls were kind of took that spirit of things.
Like in our context, the way that registered, going back to the Mastodon server that's owned by, or not owned, but run by multiple impact DAOs, one of those marks could be it could be an OAuth through wallet entry, but you have voted or participated on the blockchain some way, so that people in this community understand the tech to a very tiny degree, so that we don't get trolled. Like I keep getting trolled on Mastodon over blockchain, and my head's going to explode if it keeps happening. So in this context, then because someone has engaged with a blockchain, they can then enter this community. So I don't know technically how that would work, but without having to do wallet.
I think that's one way to think about how we might manage these agreements more broadly, is like, as you think about who that community is and how do they want to mark the inclusion or exclusion of who they're in community with. And some of that can be things like with JournoDAO, like, oh, like here's a NFT that you buy that gives you some access to a role within this community that allows you potentially some permissions of like upvoting what topics you want covered in a webinar, as Spencer was noting, but like, or maybe it's something else that it gives you access to, but you can start thinking about how to define those roles within community in any way you want. And so how you for instance, even, and this is not just rights, it's also responsibilities, right? And that responsibility might be that you don't use hate speech in our server, or that you don't do, something, you don't troll us. And, what is the way that those folks that do that are flagged and excluded, and, their access, their token to this contract is revoked in the cases that they violate some set of terms that community agrees on. And so that's a bunch of the tooling that we're building at Meme and starting to plug in across a lot of different dApps, is how do we have the community agree what they want those roles and rules to be, and they own that contract. We're delegated authority to help them plug this into dApps across the ecosystem in various ways. But the idea is that that's no longer living in the server of Guild that determines your Discord, or in the server of Paragraph, or the server of Gnosis, or any, well, Gnosis is decentralized, but like any of these different pieces. You can start saying, hey, this is our contract and how we want things to work, and how do we provide more and more tools for how you manage who you're in community with and what your rights and responsibilities are effectively. So that's kind of where we're going. And that's why I'm really excited about what you guys are doing. So I think it's like very clearly focused on like around decentralized media stuff, where I think this is where a lot of those rights and responsibilities are sorted out in ways that can be way more distributed, right? That you can think about who are all the folks that can contribute to even just curating a list of songs within the community, or whatever it might be for a playlist. Like that's another way of thinking about an entry point to this stuff.
Just a quick thing about Crystal's idea about a Mastodon server that's managed by multiple DAOs. Is this something that would it be helpful to do something like this under the auspices of the DAO coalition, or would you rather it be like exist outside of that?
Probably existing outside of that, only because I think that's more legal and legislative focused. And I kind of see this more as like impact, and impact can be very broad, so that it can include more different types of communities. And honestly, I just originally thought it just could be us, Factland, and Republic. That's kind of how the thought came into my brain.
You also probably siphon a lot of people off of that big Telegram impact cartographers club group.
Oh, I haven't even touched that. I can't even imagine. Just hearing you say
600
that,
people in that. Yeah.
Oh no, that gives me a anxiety attack. I'm never going.
But Deepa's outspoken.
I'm sure she loves that stuff. And when you watch her network in person, it's so beautiful. Keith, you saw this. I mean, she's like that in person too. It's amazing to watch. Like, I love to watch people do that. That is so not me though. but I love that people do that. I think it's great.
And I think Mastodon and what we're talking about there might be like a smaller part of kind of like Glenn, you're alluding to. I don't know if we've articulated it, but it seems like JournoDAO, part of the function we can serve is being like a lab for these tools. And Glenn, you're referencing like the JournoDAO stack, and I'm not sure that there is or will be a concrete one for like JournoDAO internally, because it seems like part of our job would be to like test things out and like try this, and then be able to then tell journalists who come into the space, like we can ask them what they're trying to do and then match them with the thing, instead of like, I mean, we could have like a prepackaged like decentralized newsroom in a box, here you go, like do all this stuff if that's what people need. But we could also just be like, well, what problem are you trying to solve, like, or what analog are you looking for from the Web 2 world, and like be able to guide them not just to, like, to the tool, but then like help onboard them and like deliver the value, where it might be hard to just for somebody to dive into something new and then immediately start understanding how it can be relevant to their journalism.
Yeah,
I like that the
that's
newsroom
actually-
in a box idea. It's cool.
No, but I mean, I think that is like, because that's kind of how I think about it too, is that like, how can you be agnostic to the stack effectively in various ways, and then allow, like, we think about the folks who are building tools and dApps for communities, how do they choose for themselves? And in this case, like, it can be, hey, for any journalist, like what are the tools that you're trying to use, and how does that work with some structure of thinking? And so it might actually like match pretty well with like one piece that you can focus in on. This is why I think these smart contracts are really interesting here, is that like what is the JournoDAO agreement effectively, that like you already have something here in terms of their NFTs that give you access. So there's already something here of like, oh, a founder NFT means that you have this credential for this community that allows you to do something or other. So it already exists, right? And so I think if you think about that as like the abstraction of who are the humans involved in this organization, and what are their relations to the digital objects that are created and curated here, but then what are the relations then to the digital object of JournoDAO? Like, this is an idea of something you all care about as JournoDAO, and like what are the different roles within that? And so this group might all be the admins of that agreement that would determine, oh, who else gets to access our spaces, whether it's Discord or wherever these things might be, who gets to access those things. And you can imagine different roles of different folks that can give them different levels of permissions to read, to write, to do whatever, they have to, maybe there's paid levels of that in terms of like webinars and other things. So there's a bunch of ways where even just thinking about what are the roles of the different people that you can imagine coming into JournoDAO might be, and how do you manage those relations for yourselves? It's your own, not your contract, not your community, is what we're saying, in the same way of like, not your keys, not your crypto. Like, how do you kind of move down that path where like, oh, this is our agreement, and what those NFTs are and what is attached to them can be things you change over time as a community as you decide. But that might be like similar here, like that's the part of the stack. It's actually you're the human level trying to hit a bunch of objectives, and that could be with DAO tools, that could be with communications and publishing tools, but how do those work for whatever this group of humans agrees on, rather than being even things like Wonderverse is like super exciting, and I'm wondering like, oh, how much of that is on-chain versus off-chain? If you needed to like take those tasks and apply them in some other place, like what is the way to allow those things to be agnostic? Or with Unlock, how do we plug, if Unlock is a tool that's really exciting for journalists, oh crap, like how do we like figure out how to plug that in so that a community can decide for themselves, oh, we want to use the Unlock tool, and here's how we make sure that all these roles that you've agreed on as humans are not living within Unlock or living within whatever your agreement is as a community. So I think that's, I think we're in kind of the same, in some ways, I think there's a lot of like good synergy there for how we are thinking about that stuff, which might be a cool thing to explore.
I want to mention one thing. So I've noticed this a lot in any Discord or, any community that revolves around cryptocurrency in some way that calls itself a DAO. There's an element of high expectation for like who's going to participate and show up. And right now we have the we're fortunate that we're small, partly by intention, partly because we don't actually know how big this would get if we just open the doors. So that's kind of an unknown. And I think there's a certain amount of over-engineering that might come into play and over bureaucratizing something that kind of doesn't exist yet. So like the human network's the only piece of this that's definitive in the equation. Everything else is variable and kind of unknown at this point. So it's, to me, it's like a priority list, right? And that means you've got a network of humans. Their function is typically journalism. Journalism typically involves curating information, generating information, disseminating information, working with sources. And that involves, okay, what do you need to do that you don't already have, and what's useful and what's redundant, and then go from there. But those are, at that point, you're talking about systems level engineering questions that are beyond the scope of what the people in this room are probably working on at the moment, except for maybe Spencer. And Spencer's got like a bigger focus and crazy. And I assume he works like 90,000 hours a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that to me, like there's a question of niche versus general, right? And I don't know if anyone here has made definitive decisions on what's niche and what's general about how JournoDAO is intended to be. I'm speaking abstractly because like we don't have a defined culture and a defined company statement on what the hell does JournoDAO mean. It's just a bunch of journalists trying to do better publishing, I think, who typically are enthusiastic about cryptocurrency and to some degree optimistic about it. I'm probably the exception there.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nick. Like we've tried to maintain like a human first approach. And when we were at MCon, Keith and I really worked on this. And then the community, the core founders really did a deep dive on this, on what the community building should look like. And we kind of deliberately chose to make it human first without the systems that Nick's talking about. It's a really good point. As we grow and that becomes unmanageable, then looking at systems to support that growth is logical. But you're also reminding me, Nick, that I never wrote the blog post to talk about that list. So thank you for reminding me.
And also to Nick's point, at least a lot of the mistakes I've made and kind of sensed have been made in this space in general have to do with that kind of over engineering, which I mean, I'd rather err on that side and just like feel out the possible ways that you can over engineer rather than not putting enough thought into it. But I definitely relate to that criticism.
Yeah. What we saw at MCon a lot was people getting on stage that had large DAOs and had been managing them for a while. And every single one of them said they did not design their DAO to deal with humans well. And that was the biggest pain point, is that they relied on the systems engineering and the technology to control the community. You can't do that. You have to have both. It has to be yes and, it can't be either or. And it's logical because a lot of these communities were started by technologists. So the human element is very unpredictable. And it's easier to say, we're going to build this bot, we're going to build this tool that will manage community. But at the end of the day, bots can't measure sentiment the way a human can. And I think that is the missing element in a lot of virtual community building, is that we're not building for humans. We might be, but we're not anticipating the nuances of human dialogue through virtual containers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're getting at what to me is like a central paradox here, is it's like the more you engineer around people, the more people feel like they're being engineered around and that they're just being like just like a cog in a system or something. And I get the sense that that's largely the kind of feeling that a lot of us are trying to avoid. But then again, if you don't put in enough thought for this stuff, then organizations don't work. But I definitely agree that the human element, it should ultimately be reduced. Like that should be the ultimate focus. And I agree that it usually isn't.
Oh,
It's
man.
figuring out how to hold space for both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this. I think this is like one of the mistakes of early DAOs was this like this kind of computer science libertarian view of how this works, which is like essentially like trustlessness within an organization, right? And then like, and how do you manage those things? And like that's not like any organization I've ever seen really. And so you have these kind of tubes that they would build that is like, oh, a DAO is it's like a corporate structure but with tokens instead of equity, and we're going to have all these same frameworks, and we're just going to use this for all the things and speed run governance in all these ways. And so I think that the thing that I'm like excited about this is like coming the other way is like, where do you start with where you just agree on what is the thing that you care about? That's the first thing that you can sign to, right? It's like, we're all token holders in JournoDAO that does this thing that we agree on. And then like, where do the roles and rules emerge? Is like, they emerge when you need to encode them in whatever ways you say. If it gets to a certain point where like, oh, we want to bring in more people and we want them, we as a group have these responsibilities and rights within ourselves of starting this thing, like any for-profit or nonprofit or church or co-op, any group of people that comes together and wants to do something. As they bring in more people, they have to figure out like, okay, like what do these people get to do? What do they have to do? And how do we allow those folks to do that? And so as that happens, you start creating subcontracts within your agreement for this is what these folks coming in can do or not do, and how do those things emerge over time. And so I think this is exactly like allowing the human space. And like, I think we see a lot of this with identity, right? Like right now, everybody's trying to create this identity layer, and it's all about like, we need to own our identity. And in many ways, that's still a computer science. Like identity is in relation to your communities. Like, it's not this like, I own this and it's this one piece across a public graph. It's the same kind of problem that we're dealing with. And I think we'll need a really different set of solutions and thinking. So yeah, I'm just excited that this is very much in the same vibe. So yeah, love that. Very cool.
And the over decentralization of things. I'm helping a community now and they've decentralized every damn thing. And oh my God, I was like, y'all need to put the centralization walls back up real fast. Because this is a shit show and there's no adults in the room. So you have to be mindful of, there's beauty in decentralization, but it also has to be done mindfully again. So, yeah.
And I think the MetaGov folks are pretty interesting on this too. Where like, I think sort of some of the default is something like benevolent feudalism is how you start, and then you like slowly work your way out into like what the how do you create the fiefdoms for different sub communities, and then the rules for how they integrate, and yeah, it's interesting.
Benevolent feudalism, I love that.
I have to roll in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So if I drop out.
Eric is super pissed that we're eating
No, I totally want, I feel like we should have like a part two.
Drooling. Oh, I've got 45 minutes and now that's been cut down significantly.
I totally want to get to FTX.
Yeah, I do also have 15 minutes, but I mean, yeah, I have been deeply into SBF and FTX, and actually colleague just sent me this thing that I put in the chat that was actually published during this call, which is a Twitter exchange between a Vox reporter and SBF that
oh my God, I'm reading it.
It's kind of revealing and doesn't really doesn't reflect well, unsurprisingly.
Oh, so that's what it was. That explains everything. Okay. No, I see it here. He's exonerated himself. Oh man. The world owes him an apology.
Wow.
Wait, are you serious or y'all joking?
No,
I can't read that fast.
I'm just saying I don't have to read it in order to know that it's not going to go well for him.
The fact that the New York Times whitewashed it already, I mean, that just speaks volumes. I'm sorry.
Poor guy. He's going to be SBF's butt buddy for the rest of his career. And everyone else is, yeah, I mean, he's pretty young.
It's going to be a long time.
I mean, I tell you, every time it's Occam's razor, and I mean, it sure just reads like a kid in over his head who didn't turn out to be as smart as he thought he was.
I just think, I mean, did he not build the back door from FTX over to Alameda? Was that bullshit? Did anybody confirm that? Because that just blows that whole I'm stupid argument right out of the water.
I'm not sure how this happens without him either having a back door or everyone else being in on it. I mean,
yeah, I don't buy the I'm stupid argument.
Just mechanically, I don't see how that could happen.
Yeah. And then the whole thing, I think I put this in the thread, Eric, last night of that came out about Caroline from the CEO of Alameda and her Tumblr. Like, I'm glad I didn't go read it. I'm glad somebody else read it. Like a journalist took one for the team and then read it for us. But
I read
that
it too.
stuff, oh. And then my friend that's from San Francisco, she's like, yeah, I've seen these communities do this stuff. It's like, holy crap. And she's friends with a guy that was in there.
Yeah, they're bringing down polycules too. It's like it's a bummer. Apparently, there's a sex tape coming too, which I've heard of. But
No one wants it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need that visual in my brain. Ever.
I don't want a fappening for crypto. I'm good without it.
Which journalist is going to take the team for that one?
Yeah.
Eric.
Yeah.
So how's it been writing this article? I mean, are you how deep into the long form article are you right now, Eric?
I haven't even started writing it. I'm still reading, and I just have this insane long list of links, and I'm getting notes from other editors and colleagues that are like, should we write a breaking news piece on this? Should this be part of your piece? Should this be a breaking news piece? And it's like there's something like, there's literally been 3 things today. It's like, okay, there's the congressional hearing looks like it's going to happen. There's a class action lawsuit that names Tom Brady and Giselle. There's this thing that I just posted in here. It's like literally something every couple hours, something new. It's just hard to keep up with everything at this point. But yeah, I have to sit down and actually start writing today at some point.
Do you have a graphics guy for visualizations?
It's not that part is out of my hands, and whether or not they utilize that person isn't up to me. So
Oh boy.
they don't let the freelancer make call on graphics. But there is a good graphics person, but this thing is so like evolving so quickly and changing so quickly that I don't think it's going to get that treatment, at least not right away. But this is the kind of thing that's going to be updated pretty continuously. Like the actual piece that ends up getting published is probably going to mutate and get updated constantly over the next few weeks.
The
Axios-
graphics will be for the textbook.
Right.
Yeah, Axios has done a pretty decent job of the short form version of this, and they've dropped a few Web3 stories in the past few months that I was like, ooh, somebody over there is actually doing their homework. So I've kind of been monitoring the way they're covering this, and they've had multiple stories almost every day on this. So I thought that was interesting.
Michael Lewis has been with SBF for the last 6 months. So sounds like there's going to be a big short 2 of some point coming out of this.
Good
That would
thing
be
we
a
did it.
really entertaining movie.
I mean, this is Shakespearean, right? Like, it's just incredible. I think the regulatory thing is that I'm, at least as a builder in the space, I'm most nervous about. It's just like FTX has their fingers in so many places, and like with those stipulations that they, a lot of those folks have to hold their treasuries in FTX. Like, I don't know when we're going to hear about all these things coming through, but if you look at that like spreadsheet of all of the FTX and Alameda related companies and everything else, it's pretty terrifying. And then SBF being one of the lead faces in the regulatory, like, fuck, I don't know. I'm very, very nauseous at the thought of what that means for the next wave of regulatory stuff. So
It really does feed into the conspiracy version of that story. That's what's kind of fascinated me from when this really started breaking, is that somebody that deep into the legislative process was also that crooked. That's just a thread that needs to be really unraveled deeply, I think. And I don't know how deep you could unravel that given the depth of the political connections that it looks like that goes to.
It's one of those threads that you can't investigate on chain. You'd have to go to some closed sources.
And that's where it really does fall to the media to cover this properly, because if they miss that part of the story, that's huge. That goes into what Glenn's saying about the whole pit in the feeling in the pit of your stomach because getting to that answer is so deep.
And I think it also shows just the power of this narrative. So I don't know if you guys saw the I can find the term sheet he was floating to VCs right now is just absurd. It's like a child wrote a term sheet. It's nothing like I've ever seen before. And like I think it gives a window into how they probably behaved before, and that like with enough of the narrative, and I know the Sequoia story that has since been taken down of like him not even paying attention, playing Warcraft or something while he was in the meetings, and I wonder whether this is just like this story of how if he effectively negged the VCs, I think, like just like did this thing, and then this is just like a way he's doing the same thing again, hoping that it will work, and that like it's just put like it is so insane. This must have been what they thought would work too. So I'm assuming it's what they did before, and that they just had enough of the noise around the narrative that it fed itself. But yeah, I'll find that and send it because it's really it's absurd.
That's how my previous employer's company started, was seed funding from Alameda Research. So I haven't talked to the CEO there because I didn't leave on good terms with them. But I've been dying to talk to them. Honestly, I'll tell you guys something. I think there's a really good chance that this isn't over and that Asia's either going to be cushioned by Binance, or a lot of subsidiary companies that receive money from VCs like Alameda Research might have exposure that Binance. I think Binance took this as a huge strategic opportunity to make VCs beholden to them more. Because Binance and Huobi together would be a really powerful collusory element, and it already kind of was. I've been looking at that for quite a while.
I was wondering, I saw something the other day about Hoiby in this story, or however you say it, and I was curious, Nick, if that was what you were seeing a few weeks ago or a few months ago.
Yes.
When all that movement, it connects. Into
Yes, and yes. I'm not sure, but yes.
Okay, that was my gut too. As soon as I saw that, I was like, "Oh, that's what Nick found." It wasn't. And I'm sure Tron's involved in it too, but it's like that's what he stumbled on.
There was a huge story about, I'm sorry, I know you guys are both about to leave, but I mentioned this last time we had a call. Tron had 80% of their traffic that was going to Iran. I'm sorry, I'm saying it's backwards. 80% of the traffic coming from Iran to Binance, which was sanctioned funds. The story broke about that a few days before the FTX thing. 80% of that traffic was happening on Tron. So it's really difficult to analyze and track. So the notion that Justin Sun and CZ are working together, I think that strengthens the case for that. So that's why I'm talking to some of the people that are working on those things, because there's a story there that hasn't been told, and it's way too meta for people to just pick it up and understand it.
And FTX dovetails into Ukraine as well. So we're looking at geopolitics now through these.
Yeah, and that's gonna poison the whole story. Like that, and the politics stuff is gonna taint the whole well for everybody. Yeah. Guaranteed. Hillary Clinton has her video been demonetized?
Yeah, it already has on Twitter, because Twitter's guardrails are off. So
the misinformation level on Twitter right now has fooled me. I've been fooled. The thing I posted in our Discord, I'm embarrassed to say it, I totally thought that was legit the first time I posted it. I went back and read it a few hours later when I must have been tired, because the post that the guy made had, like, he said the negative flux on FTX something. He was making up terms as he went to prove how easy it was to get people to retweet bullshit. And I fell for it. Absolutely, I did. I missed that word. He just wrote some bullshit Python code that doesn't exist. He put these nuts in there. It was great. It was a masterpiece. Sam Hyde, I forgot who Sam Hyde was for a day. Sent that to someone. That was fun.
Have any of you followed up on the or aware of like more detail on the MakerDAO guy that was found in the like he had tweeted out about
yes,
this happening upon some CIA like some pedo something other. Like I don't know how much of this is. Yeah, I have no idea the veracity of any of these things, but it was all
probably unrelated. But yes, I know someone I know at Decrypt, his best friend was very good friends with that person, and he's freaking out right now. He's on Twitter. He thinks he's under threat, but I'm not sure why he thinks that. Doesn't sound like there's any facts to back that up yet. So probably a spurious conspiracy theory coincidence, but hard to say for sure.
if we were writing the Hollywood version, we might put that narrative in there to give it a twist.
That would
But
be
yeah.
a subplot they cut for the theatrical release.
Director's cut only.
Totally. Well, I got to run, so I'm not late for class. But
All
this
right.
is fun.
All right.
Yay. Thank you for moving the time up too, so I could stick around. So
Yeah, good to have you here.
thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Jim.
I was gonna say, I think the coverage has actually been overall like surprisingly good. The only thing that I think gets totally missed, and maybe it's not surprising because it's, you know, this is a salacious story and it's like the least salacious part of it, but just I'm not sure that anyone outside of our world like understands the differentiation between, you know, these are centralized exchanges and there's like this whole other world of like decentralized stuff that is, you know, actually what this was built to do and to be. And I've yet to really hear anyone make that point like in any mainstream outlet. I mean, there's plenty of editorials about that in CoinDesk and elsewhere, but like that's the one thing that I think has been totally missed in the coverage.
It is so frustrating. It is so frustrating because it's just crypto is scams. We're like, no, this is what we want to see from.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
become rating agencies. That's what
Yeah.
they become. They become rating agencies with no accountability, and it's a total black box to outside audits analyzing properly. There's the audit industry is cottage industry. Nobody knows that either. But yeah, all those pieces, I'd love to just spew all that out, but it's too much cynicism. You have to break it up and drip feed the audience. Put some honey and medicine.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the one other thing I've been trying to wrap my head around is I think there is like with all just like all the crap on Twitter and that tweet where Brian Armstrong was lauding Twitter as the, you know, the best source of information for this, like that might be true, but like that doesn't mean it's a good source. Like it's still like a fire hose of shit that you got to go through and pick a nickel out of, you know, every few hours. And it's just like there's some sort of opportunity there. Like this can't be the best system. There's some sort of opportunity there for just when these stories emerge, there needs to be some tooling for verification and credentialing and all that stuff where I mean the opportunity for an upgrade to the fact that this is what we're currently relying on, and it really is like Twitter really is what like journalists' primary source for way too much. And it's just, you know, and now it's literally getting worse by the day. So I don't know, I haven't quite gotten far enough in my thinking to figure out what it is. There's something that needs to be done there.
And I'm so sorry to talk so much. You know, Eric, I think there's something that I haven't seen anybody do yet that would really solve this problem. Put enough pressure on Chainalysis to give their tools to fucking journalists. Stop gating the information and then neglecting it because you're part of the institutional corruption. Let other people look at what's going on with this customer data and license it. And I don't see anyone saying anything similar to that. I sound like a crazy person every time I do it, but I'll keep doing it.
We actually like that actually came up when we were talking to John on the recording with Humpty this morning, is that yeah, I made that point that like all these tools have been built, you know, whether it's Nansen or Chainalysis, like they've either been built for investors or for you know, huge corporate or government customers, right? So there's literally no tool that exists to analyze this stuff with the public interest or the public good in mind. So then it's like a huge void. So yeah, totally agree.
That might be an interesting partnership with the webinar stuff too, where you can do webinars on how to use Chainalysis, do this for a group of folks that's actually driving usage of their product and probably a bunch of more attention. That there could be something kind of BD wise to do there. One other quick thought on the Twitter thing, because it's something I've been talking to some of these other folks that are playing around with the mark making pieces of like, imagine that there was a way to have a Twitter list that then can control a Twitter account. through its interactions in various ways, its marks that it makes on Twitter, right? So if it's a group of journalists that have some level of trust, that like even if it's like folks responding with a hashtag, or how many of these folks say, so like there might be some way that that it is kind of a first version and almost an MVP of playing with decentralized reporting, where you say this community of journalists that are tracking this story are able to contribute in various ways to this community that then will control what this account kind of curates together, what is able to go out. So that might be a way to start playing with some of these. Who gets to propose a tweet to this community, that it's their own individual tweet that they're proposing, effectively, maybe with a hashtag for it to go into this feed. And then how do the other folks in that community engage with that proposal for it to actually go onto the shared record in the form of being tweeted out by, now this authority that is the community of journalists that are covering that. And so playing with those, like we're pretty close to having all these tools available, and then this could be really like fun to play with just on Twitter, right? Of just like, oh, can we do something even experimentally with like, all right, here's an SBF feed of any of the new things that come through. Is there at least one? And it's not Twitter's version of doing this thing. It's actually this community of journalists is going to make their own decisions as to how they want to do the editorial process of, with the inputs. Everything is on chain on Twitter, effectively, in some way. So I think there might be a really interesting way to play together on that. If folks are getting
Prototype for a vetted Twitter feed. That would be, and we could even have our own. We have our own check mark. We have the green check mark that we.
$9 for ours.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, we're already doing this with so that these Stigmark guys are doing this within a Discord right now, and then they're curating what comes out of that Discord into a Twitter channel, right? Using the marks that are made by folks within that. And then, I'm working with them on like, how do we think about different roles and agreements as to managing this logic for a community to allow lots of other communities to use these kind of things. And so like, I think starting to think about what are the iterations of how does a community decide on their roles within a space for curating media, or creating and or curating media in these ways. And like who, even if the roles are just there's a contributor that proposes, there's an editor that is a group of folks that either votes together or has some decision-making capacity for how to actually promote that into a approved, shared record effectively. And that's so all these things are pretty close. And so I would love to, whenever we get this group of folks together, like if you guys are game for playing with some of those tools, I think we'd have some folks that are very game for building them. So I think that's a good match.
What is the name of that other community? Stigmarker? What is it?
Yeah, it's called they could go by Common Sense Makers. And yeah, it's Ronan Tamari is this he's an AI PhD, like brilliant guy. I can send you guys more stuff. I'll grab this stuff and send it over, because they're largely a part of the Token Engineering Commons, and they're building tools for the Token Engineering Commons kind of together to like first testing these things out, and then the idea is like, oh, how do we apply this elsewhere? And so this might be a good place to play with it. Yeah,
I've got to drop off, but
Awesome.
Keith is now your host.
Awesome.
So
great chatting,
look
guys.
forward to continuing this.
Yeah, I have to go too, so why don't we call it?
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thanks all.
Bye, guys.
Yeah,
Yes.
discussion.
Yeah.
See you later.